Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Internal Communications Inspiring Employee Engagement webinar. We're very happy to announce this webinar and have a very exciting guest that will be sharing a lot of information with us related to internal communications and how organizations can inspire employee engagement. Today's webinar speaker is Ron Maturo, Vice President of Internal Communications. Ron is also formerly with Merck and Royce Energy, where he was heading up communications and employee engagement areas. I'm one of the panelists, Chief Revenue and Marketing Officer at CoreDigitalWorks. Today's topic will involve not only the internal communications, but also the technologies that are involved in enabling that inside of organizations. As you probably know, there's been a tremendous explosion of mobile devices and mobile technologies, and that explosion of connected smart devices is clearly enabling and shifting, and at the same time challenging organizations in every industry in terms of transformation of not only their business processes, but how the content and information is being consumed internally, externally, and within their value chain and partner chain. In addition to the mobile computing and mobile consumption of content, there's also, in general, an explosion of content. Some of the evidence of that is the fact that spending on content marketing is increasing by 15 to 20% year to year. 9 out of 10 organizations market with content by now. A lot of marketers are beginning to pay attention to content marketing and production of content and deployment of content, which is video, documents, PDF documents, presentations, sales presentations, and so forth, is exploding as well. 8 out of 10 chief marketing officers, for example, believe that they will not be able to conduct any marketing without content whatsoever. In addition to that, the use of mobile optimized content has risen from 15% in 2011 to 33% in 2012, and that number has continued to increase in 2013 to 50% and other increases like that. We're anticipating that in 2014, mobile optimized content will continue to rise at staggering rates. The use of virtual video conferencing has risen from 10% to 28% in 2012, and those numbers are increasing again. So clearly, there are 2 areas that are converging. The fact that employees, partners, customers, and consumers in general are going mobile, and there's a tremendous explosion of content and tremendous explosion of consumable content that is out there in organizations, and how these constituents are using content, how they're consuming the content, what they do with that is partly the topic of our webinar today. So at this time, I would like to pass this over to Ron, and he will start talking about some of the challenges, communication challenges, and also solutions and remedies that these 2 trends are, forcing organizations to look at. Ron, go ahead.
Thank you, Alex, and thanks everyone for attending the session today. Alex, you presented some really good content there about the explosion of not only the devices, but the content. And as internal communication people, we all know content is king. So that's great that we have the content. One of our challenges, especially in the mobile space and the social space, is that more than half the companies out there don't have a social media policy in place. And this is a big issue for a lot of us in a corporate environment. First off, our employees who can be wonderful ambassadors for us either don't know what to say or if they even should be saying it. And that's both a positive and a negative. You can have employees out there talking about your company and saying things that just aren't appropriate. They may be confidential information. It might be insider information that you don't want out there. So it's key to have the policy. The flip side of that is many times the groups that are controlling the social media for a company are not talking to us internal communications people and are communicating out about the company before we are able to communicate those same topics to our employee base. Total disconnect makes everyone look bad. We also, as many of you will know, have a lot of challenges with staffing. We always work with bare bones staffing, which makes makes it harder to look at new channels, take on new channels, and get our information out there quickly. At the same time, we need to make sure that everything we do has the greatest reach and is very, very cost effective. And I think this is a problem that we really need to solve for. We default to our standard tools because of cost effectiveness. We go and look at, oh, we'll send this via email or we'll post it on the internet. And of course, everybody's going to see it simply because it's cheap. But that's just not true. Next piece would really be, do I as a team leader, do my staff have the time to learn and manage a new communication platform? What's the benefit to my team? Ultimately, then that begs the question, is my content secure? Some of us work in regulated industries, so we have very, very significant security concerns that what we're communicating to our internal employee base is done in a secure way, because we are subject to auditing and ultimately fines if we're not doing it right. And that, again, comes back to that whole idea is, do I really have another channel that I need to manage, and what's the benefit for me? The last piece of this puzzle is measurement. I think many internal communications groups fall short in looking at measuring what they're doing and talking about what's the business impact. I wanted to talk about return on investment and measurement in the same breath, because if you are measuring properly and measuring actionable items, you can then correlate that back to a return on investment. So you can say to your management, we've seen X increase in employee engagement, satisfaction with the message, understanding of strategy, in order to then justify additional expenses and funding as you move forward. So why do we want additional funding? Why do we want better ways to communicate to our employee base? We all have seen our employee engagement numbers, and if you're in the 70% range, you're probably sitting back going, I'm doing pretty good if 70% of my employees fall in that engaged category, the people that really are coming to work with passion and connections to the company. You also have the disengaged. I look at the disengaged and say the return on investment to get a disengaged employee engaged is so high that I'm really not going to focus on why they're disengaged. But it's that group of non-engaged employees that we have the biggest potential impact on. And we really need to think about how we're getting our content out there and why are they not engaged. The reason that most employees will tell you that they are not engaged is that they are not actively involved in the conversation. They are not having a dialogue with typically their direct manager. The managers are not communicating out corporate messages. They're not explaining the relevancy of those messages, nor are they making it real for people. They're not telling people what's happening, when it's happening, and that always elusive why it's happening. So as an internal communication person and as a group, you really need to think about how you're leveraging your channels to augment what the managers are communicating or not communicating, and really look at how social media has become a main trend for communications, and we as internal communicators really need to push and jump on that bandwagon. That idea of sending it to people's devices that they carry with them, sending it in much shorter, briefer messages, and really in a much shorter time frame. Now granted, we have huge challenges in attracting younger talent, and if there's one thing that we as internal communications can put out there is using what people are using at home, using the technologies that everyone is texting, checking their smartphones as they come in and out of work. So let's leverage them during work hours. As the millennial group, grows and expands into corporate environments, we really have to pay attention to what the age difference, the demographics want. And that is typically more timely and absolutely more transparent communications. So when you think about that transparent and timely information, that drives some very, very significant benefits, again, that you can tie back to the return on investments. And depending on what studies you read, the numbers can be significantly different. Increasing performances by 40% is a very common one. A recent Gallup poll said that engaged employees, or companies with engaged employees, are 1.7 times more likely to outperform their competitors. And these are significant numbers that businessmen listen to and say, wow, this can have a definite benefit for us. So you go from being a cost center to really generating revenue for the company. So when you have engaged employees, as you all know, your turnover drops, and the cost of onboarding employees and getting them up to speed not only costs a lot of money, it takes a lot of time. You can look at your company's financial success and your customer satisfaction numbers. All of these things make your company stand out in a world that's got, every company out there has hundreds of competitors today. So using and leveraging internal communications really can provide direct benefit. So really, when you look at it, what do our employees or our consumers of communications want? Well, every study I've seen is telling me they want mobility. They want to use their own devices whenever possible. They don't want to carry their personal cell phone, which is probably a smartphone, and a BlackBerry. Or they might be carrying an iPad or a tablet. So they want to be able to access their information when they want, wherever they are, on whatever device they're using. And, of course, that has to be secure. Absolutely has to be secure. They also want tools and information that really is driving productivity. So they don't want to read a 1,000-word article if you can communicate that out in 200 words. Even better if you can do a tease or get them some level of information in 140 characters. This is where you need to do your extra effort on measurement. You need to show that communications is driving productivity. Next item here is transparency, and I can't reinforce enough how important the appearance of transparency is to employee engagement. If your employees think you as internal communications or you as senior leaders is hiding something, that will drive your numbers down faster than anything. So you really need to get your information out there as quick and clear as possible. Privacy is also key. Along with security, you want to make sure that you're getting the information that I want, not what my coworker wants, so that I'm getting my information in a very private, secure fashion. And all of these lead to a lot of technology challenges. So really, when you think about, as an internal communication professional, what do I need in order to do this and support a mobile channel? And that really comes down to, letting me as owner of content have visibility and control over when and what is being downloaded to our employees' devices, what data do we really leave on those devices, how easy is it for me to deploy. I can't sit here and say I have a year or a year and a half to deploy a mobile solution. I need to be able to go to management and say I can get to our employees quickly, easily, and securely. And I keep bringing that word up, secure. Security and compliance. I'm working in a highly regulated industry. We need to track everything that we push out, no matter what the form is. And I'm sure some of you do as well. So the need for that security and compliance and especially when you're pushing it to an employee's personal device, you really need to make sure that what you're using is secure and compliant. And interoperations, I can't deploy a system that doesn't work with my content management or my BI systems. That is just too much for me and most internal communication people to take on. So it really needs to be something, and you'll hear Alex talk to it shortly, something that will work with your existing systems, that will work with your SharePoint environment and your existing legacy systems. So really, what I'm asking you guys to do today is think about how you can benefit from mobile, and think about how you look at the data that you're getting from your engagement surveys and define actionable items. And I bet you're going to find, the ability to get mobile data is a key driver there. It'll allow you to focus on your local and your organizational levels that make information relevant. Many times as a corporate communicator, you're communicating out to tens of thousands of people. When I send out messages, I cannot, in my current environment, make it relevant. But in a new mobile environment, you can. Also, selecting the right tools of communications, using them really to increase engagement, and using them wisely, and leveraging people's devices and social media to really impact change. Think about your demographics and how they're going to react to change and what they're going to be talking about. And that way, what are they going to be talking about ties back to one of the first things I said, that you really need to have that policy in place so that they know what they can and cannot say. And finally, we really need to define our goals in realistic terms. Studies will tell you if you're trying for major culture change, you need 3 to 5 years to do it. But that doesn't mean you can't see significant impact right off the bat. And again, being able to deploy a mobile application or a mobile solution quickly will be able to make impact, within the first 6 months. So what I'd like to do now is hand this back to Alex.
Yes, thank you, Ron. I have a few questions I'd like to actually continue with the discussion, but let me quickly go through some of the tools that you talked about that can facilitate internal communications and can actually enable or empower social employees to leverage the infrastructure for internal communications that may exist there. I want to briefly talk about CoreDigitalWorks. We're an early stage company that just produced a set of really great tools for mobile engagement with content, and we have a product called Core Content and Core Mobile that works together, and I'll talk a little bit more about this. But perfect fit for internal communications type of infrastructure and for companies that want to engage employees and social employees in terms of their ability to consume content, to share content, and to facilitate communications internally and externally. Let's talk a little bit about why core content and products like that and tools like that. Core content and core mobile work together in an orchestrated fashion where the marketing organization or human resources organization or an organization that is responsible for internal communications can actually orchestrate content being delivered to employees, to partners, to the value chain partners, and really deliver the most relevant and most interesting content to those constituents. The products such as Core Content and Core Mobile will enable the organizations to, first of all, embrace the bring your own device policy. This is important because, again, companies do not want to continue to spend on internal infrastructure, and it's easy for them to deliver content in a secure fashion to the existing devices that employees may have. The other piece that's important is that role-based management is very crucial here, because some folks would like to consume content as consumers, if you will, and other folks would like to edit content or share it. They may be able to create their own groups and participate in different groups. We want to enable the internal organization to be as flexible and as fluid as possible. And at the same time, we want to follow the policy that the organization may have in terms of how this content is being distributed and how it's being delivered to mobile devices. The other very important piece here that Ron talked about is the actual leverage of the buzz that employees may produce themselves. So instead of delivering what we are considered a push mechanism, email is a good example of that. So if fresh content is available to employees to consume, to share, to enjoy, or to simply do their job with, they will see a notification similar to the one you see on Facebook, which is this little red indicator that says, okay, you have new content now available. And that's a call to action to say, okay, I want to take a look at it, I want to review it, I want to be able to share it, or something like that. At the same time, the marketing organization or an organization responsible for communications can orchestrate this content and deliver it at the right time, and then take it back, once this content is old and not relevant. We're also operating with the broad range of content types. The engagement it's important to leverage the richness of media today. So the engagement could be through social media, it could be through video, it could be through a smart PDF document that allows you to respond to it. It could be a presentation in the HTML5 format. It could even be an application. So we have the ability to deliver any type of format to the audience and then measure and analyze the effectiveness of that. Many times when you ask the organizations, how do you measure the effectiveness of the content you have within the organization? And they have a very difficult time saying it or measuring it. They can certainly say, okay, so many people clicked on that particular presentation, or they viewed the video, but we're not sure how much of the video they viewed, and so forth. So content effectiveness and the communication effectiveness is extremely important, because you really need to understand, especially when you have hundreds of thousands of employees, you really need to understand at a global level how effective is the content that you're producing and how you're communicating the content to the constituents. So Ron talked a little bit about how do you engage employees through a program within your company. We're matching our functionality to those types of needs and requirements. So it has to save time. We're saving time by introducing drag and dropping and multi-upload functionality for several files at once, so that it's intuitive and it's something that folks are already used to. Obviously, it has to be very secure and independent of the device that you may have, with the audience. In terms of scheduling, updating, and setting time-spaced expirations, clearly that level of flexibility is important for any type of content orchestrators or editors. Larger organizations today are able to function only through the use of multiple different platforms. So integration is key here. Our platforms are well integrated with CRM systems that may exist and the content management systems that may be deployed in the organization. We have to match to the existing policies. Ron talked about the importance of communications according to some kind of a policy, be it the social media policy or content distribution policy or human resource communications policy within the company. And finally, analytics and reporting is extremely important as well. So the combination of an explosion of content and the mobility makes it extremely important for the organization to function, and not just to function as a in the day-to-day operations-based activity, but also in how the organizations can leverage what their employees and what their partners and what their constituents can do with those types of technologies according to those types of policies. The orchestration of that mobility and orchestration of that mobile content will make those organizations a lot more effective. What I'd like to suggest we do now is, first of all, open the floor for any type of questions you may have. And you can submit the questions via questions section here in the webinar. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to actually turn to Ron and ask him a couple of questions that we may be able to answer or discuss this topic further. Ron, in terms of the use of technology and the use of tools today, what can you say about the level of sophistication within the organizations today and how they're actually able to use technology for communications and employee engagement?
Yeah, Alex, that's a great question. I think that the use of technology and how sophisticated they are really goes to corporate culture and the demographics within an organization. So is the corporate culture set up that they really value communications with their employees, and are they really trying to leverage the technology to drive the business forward? So are people constantly connected through some sort of smartphone or iPad device so that they can check status of business processes or communications? The second side of that is demographics. And I'll be honest with you, as we get older, I'm in my early 50s, and I struggle sometimes with some of the newer technologies out there and finding value with it. So depending on your organization, I think that you might see some reluctance to adopt some of the newer technology, and also keep in mind, the regulations. So if you're in a highly regulated environment, you're definitely going to be a little bit slower to adopt some of the cutting-edge technology, because again, you're subjecting yourself to review by an outside agency and then ultimately opening yourself up to potential fines. But as the millennial group is growing, and as the older demographics are saying, okay, this is no longer just a fun device, there's actual function to device, I think it is growing, and I think we're on that edge now that if we don't get involved from an internal communication perspective, we as a function won't be of value if we're not using this type of technology.
Another question I have is, as the organization is trying to balance this investment in technology and tools and so forth, and at the same time they're trying to gauge employee engagement, they're trying to leverage the collective social sentiment, the social bias that may be positive. How do companies balance this through policies? Can you talk a little bit about the best practices in terms of policies, be it a social media policy, or be it a communications policy? How can technology or better process facilitate the move towards a more unified, a more acceptable policy for everyone?
That's a tough question. I'm not sure I have the answer to that. I think Alex, if I did, I wouldn't be working right now. but I think that having clear policies and having the technology to support those policies suddenly opens up the doors. People stop thinking about what can't I do, but really what can I do with the technology, because they're seeing us communicate out on certain topics. So they suddenly take ownership and continue and act as ambassadors. But once you know the policy, you build your systems around that policy, I think it really becomes part of the DNA of how people communicate. So I hope I've answered the question. I think that's a tough one. But
yes, I agree, and I think you have answered it, because I think, based on my experience in social media specifically, social media policies or communication policies externally actually are still being matured. Internally, or policies for the internal communications are also somewhat of a challenge because of some of the items you've mentioned in terms of employees who may be engaged, employees who may not be engaged, or they're somewhat engaged, and so forth. Forgetting about technology for a second, what are some of the other things you can share with us that your companies can do in terms of really exciting the employees, making them sort of be unified in one voice, or at least a positive voice? Or if the voice or sentiment is negative, what can companies do to get better at managing that?
Yeah, there's a lot that we can do there, Alex. The first part is being timely and transparent. If you really want your employees to think and be engaged, they need to have that confidence that they're getting the truth that you can tell them. And I mean, employees are smart enough to know that you can't always tell them everything. But if they feel you're telling them that everything that they need to know in a timely fashion, that's one key piece. The second side, which is what most companies miss. 90% of the companies I've talked to miss this point, that their employees are their ambassadors. And you need to give those employees talking points in some shape or form so that they can talk to friends, families, other employees about good news that goes out or bad news. You know, it's great and easy when it's always good news, but you can really leverage your employee base when it's bad news so that the truth is getting out about what is that incident. I worked at Merck during the Vioxx days, and there was a lot of press around Vioxx at the time. But you know what? There was an underlying truth that wasn't always getting presented in the media. So if you can use your employees to communicate for you, both positive and negative, let them be prepared. There's nothing better than an employee who has all the information that they need to engage in the conversation. And we forget that they are our best ambassadors.
Right, thank you. Another question I have is, actually there's some questions from the audience that are coming in. The question is, what is the role of leadership and executive management in this particular process? Clearly, if there are tools available, we can easily gauge the employee sentiment and so forth. But what should the role be of the top echelon, if you will, in this entire process?
Yeah, that's always an interesting question. They really need to be the champions. They need to make it clear to their employees that this is the future of how we're going to be communicating, and they need to make this real. Now, a lot of leaders like to say they blog, right? And blog is, in my opinion, old technology today. But they say they blog, but yet they have their internal communication person write it and ghostwrite it for them. Well, employees know that. And employees look at these blogs and go, yeah, that's a joke, because it's not real. So what a leader who is serious about this needs to do is take ownership, make time on their calendars to actually engage in the conversation, engage in that mobile communications, and make things real for their employees. So they got to be an active communicator using the channel that's being developed. It's not easy for them. Many of them will say, I'm too busy, I don't know how to do it. Well, you can be taught and you can make the time. So hopefully that answers that.
Right. Yes, it does. Another question is, in terms of tools for training internally. Clearly, you cannot expect, potentially, you cannot expect a lot of engagement from the internal, from the internal communications engagement or even external engagement from the employees without a certain level of training. How do you know as an organization what is the right amount of training and what type of training should be delivered and how? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. How much training and what training? How much training do you get when you buy an iPad? Right? You really don't get any. I mean, they don't even give you a owner's manual. So if you're doing this right, your employees don't need training. What I think you need is the marketing campaign, an internal marketing campaign about what you're doing. And in that, you can provide the training on how to connect, how to get your apps, what to expect on the first day, what to expect in an ongoing fashion. So I would not tag it as official training, because when I hear the word training, I think I'm going to either sit in an hour-long class or I'm going to get a link and I have to watch the animated slideshow. I think you should think out of the box and think about how do you market and sell this. And again, look at how external companies are marketing their products. Nobody says, oh, and we provide you training on how to use this new tool. I just got a brand new smartphone, and other than how do I set it up, I don't read the manual. I just play. So I think that that's something that you build in. Think about building in some of your first communications as a training tool. Make them go take a survey. Make them go respond to your posting or your app uploading, and they'll learn naturally.
Another question that just came through the system, through the webinar system, is if the system is supportive of multi-language communications as well, specifically via video in large enterprises where multiple languages exist. Actually, it's a great question, not just in terms of technology. What does an organization do and how they deploy those when you do have a very large multinational organization with multiple languages spoken internally inside of company, and also if you're dealing with a number of locations where the company is operating. First of all, technology-wise, that's the easy aspect of it. The core content and core mobile platform supports multiple languages right off the bat, and clearly you need to make sure that the content is also delivered in multiple languages. But Ron, let me turn this over to you. How do you communicate effectively within the multi-language type of environment?
Yeah, that's probably one of the hardest things from an internal communication perspective. The best direct example I can give you is, at Merck we had 11 official languages, and really the intent was to communicate out in as many languages as possible. The reality is, how much money did we have to spend on translation services, and how much time did we have to get these messages out? So you really need a solid translation policy. And I hate to keep saying you need policy after policy, but you need some guidepost to say, what do I really need to translate? If it's a key strategy message, yeah, it's got to get translated. If it's a organizational announcement for a mid-level executive, maybe not. Okay, I think that what you have to do is clarify what is actually reasonable and deliverable. You really can't just say, well, we're going to do some. You got to say, we're going to do these types of documents. We're going to do it in X days of the announcement coming out in English, and then we're going to deliver it. So it really comes down to how many languages do you have, and look at your demographics and your audience, because while a lot of people say, well, they understand English. Well, they may understand conversational English, but I bet you they don't really understand it when you're reading a strategy document. So think about what languages you need to translate into. Think about what the time frame from when you have an English approved version. Do you expect to have the foreign language? Does it have to go out the same time? And is that realistic? And C, do you have the budget to do that? Some of the translation services that I've used have been fantastic, but they're expensive. They charge by the word. And if you think you're going to do your translations in-house, you're mistaken. You're not, because people are not going to have the time to do translations for you, and you're not going to be able to ensure quality control. They may be translating into a conversational version when it's a formal announcement. So think about it, put a policy in place, make sure you have management's buy-in, because it's going to be coming down to budgetary issues, but also thinking about timing.
Great insight, great answer. A couple of more questions, Ron. The tool set and tools in general, especially core mobile and core content, allow for group-based communications and multiple roles. But when you translate that into into a live audience, if you will, in a large company, I've noticed that many companies promote the ability for influencers or ambassadors, if you will, to create their own groups internally. What are your thoughts on on this dynamic? What are your thoughts on on the development of the number of groups or number of influencers, if you will, that have multiple groups, and not necessarily managing them, but acting as ambassadors. And what is the role of executive management and management in general with those ambassadors?
Yeah, that's a great question. Wow. I'm on the fence on that one, to be honest with you, because of the ability to customize what information I get. You can go too far and have too many groups, and suddenly it just seems like I'm getting everything. So you really need to, in my opinion, think twice on having too many groups out there, because then suddenly you belong to 20 different groups, but yet you're talking about same content in all of them. And you can really cloud your issue if you're not careful. The second half of that question is the number of influencers or ambassadors or evangelists, whatever term you want to call them. I think they are key to the success of any of these technologies, channels, whatever you want to call them, where you find the people in the organization, whether they're leaders or not. Okay, leaders, in my opinion, aren't always the people who have the titles. But know your organization. Find the people who have influence that will stand up in front of a group of people and have the respect of those people and say, this is a cool idea. I can really get my information from this, or I can get the applications that I need in a timely fashion. So highly supportive of building your network of influencers. And the other half of that question was, what is the leadership involvement in that group? They need to be willing to sit down and talk to those people, have that open and blunt conversation. What's going on in my organization? What are you hearing? What do you need from us as senior leaders in order to get our messages out there? And they got to be active and willing to hear what these evangelists have to say.
Right. Great insight, great answer. A couple of more questions that I think we need to wrap up. By the way, continue to ask questions, everyone. We're getting questions via email and via a live session here in webinar as well. Another question that has to do with communications that is spanning not just the internal organization, but also when you begin to work within the value chain with partners, distributors, the entire supply chain, if you will. Do the same policies, does the same process or methodologies, do they apply to those constituents as well?
I believe they do. I think that if you can have a common policy, no matter who you're communicating to, the safer you'll be. You won't miss a step. And I think that as we start communicating openly and transparently, why should it be different between what we tell a person in the supply chain, an employee, or ultimately the client or customer? So if you build your process with the proper reviews, the proper sign-offs, I think you can turn this into a one policy fits all in most organizations.
Ron, I guess I'll ask you a final question, and we will probably be wrapping up. Your career, you spend part of your career in the most exciting organizations out there, very large in size, diverse companies like Merck, Royce, Bank of New York. What advice would you give to the companies that are larger in size and also medium-sized companies in how they can become more agile, more open, more communicative, if you will, in terms of how they should approach the 21st century, and move forward in terms of internal communications and inspiring employees with the engagement?
Yeah, I've been lucky in my career. I've worked for some great organizations, and in each one of them, they've allowed me to experiment and try things. So what I would say to everyone is, find the champion within the organization that'll give you the opportunity to implement a mobile app, and even if it's a small pilot, get it out there, measure it, and show the benefit. And when you're measuring it, make sure you look at it from a actionable perspective, and then move quickly. I've always said to the senior leaders I've worked for that not everything we try is going to work. But if we don't try, we're going to miss great opportunities. And I think mobile is one of those areas that there's no way it's going to fail. People want to get the information when they want it. We no longer control that. So we need to give our audiences that information, giving it to them in a mobile way. Start small if you have to. Trying to roll this out to 100,000 people at once, no. Trying to roll it out to 10,000, yeah, absolutely. Get your feet wet, show how it's having impact, and then go from there, but be fast about it.
Thank you very much, Ron. I'd like to thank you, and I'd like to thank our audience for today's webinar, Internal Communications Inspiring Employee Engagement. Would like to thank again CoreDigitalWorks for sponsoring, organizing this event. We have additional information available on the tools available to facilitate internal communications. This session was recorded, so we will have the recording of this event available to our audience. And Ron, thank you once again for your participation, your leadership, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you, Alex. It's been my pleasure. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I am on LinkedIn, and you can find me there.
Great. Thank you very much.